Welcome to Shadow Frames, where we explore the mysteries hidden within forgotten images. Today, we delve into one of the most disturbing photographs from the late Victorian era, a seemingly ordinary hospital scene that conceals a chilling secret. The year is 1897. The Industrial Revolution has transformed society, bringing both progress and peril. Medicine struggles to keep pace with the changing world. In the growing cities of America and Europe, hospitals are overcrowded, understaffed, and often dangerous places where many enter, but not all leave. Our story begins with Edward Blackwood, a photographer commissioned to document the conditions at Ravenswood Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. Edward was known for his precise work, his attention to detail, and his growing reputation as one of the finest medical photographers in New England. What he captured on that cold November day would haunt him for the remainder of his life. The photograph in question appears unremarkable at first glance, a standard documentation of hospital life. 3 nurses stand alongside a row of iron beds, their starched white uniforms and caps pristine against the drab surroundings. Patients lie still beneath thin blankets. Gas lamps cast long shadows across the wooden floors. The image speaks of order, discipline, and the clinical efficiency so prized in Victorian medicine. But it is what the photograph does not immediately reveal that has captivated collectors of unusual artifacts for decades. For in bed number 7, partially obscured by the stern figure of Nurse Catherine Holloway, lies 12-year-old Elizabeth Collins, and on her pillow, if one looks closely enough, is something that should not be there, something impossible. Edward Blackwood arrived at Ravenswood Hospital on November 18, 1897. The hospital superintendent, Dr. William Hayes, had commissioned a series of photographs to accompany his annual report to the hospital board. Hayes was a forward-thinking physician who believed in the new antiseptic methods championed by Lister and the emerging importance of trained nursing staff. He wanted to document the improvements he had made to the children's ward, improvements he hoped would secure additional funding. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming on such short notice," Dr. Hayes said as they shook hands in the hospital's administrative office. The room was warm, heated by a coal stove in the corner, a sharp contrast to the November chill outside. "The board meets in 2 weeks, and I'm determined to show them how far we've come since last year." Edward nodded, removing his gloves and hat. At 35, he cut an impressive figure, tall and slender, with a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes. He had made a name for himself photographing medical subjects, from surgical procedures to anatomical specimens. This assignment seemed straightforward by comparison. "Happy to be of service, Doctor. I understand you want to focus on the children's ward." "Indeed. We've implemented several innovations there. Improved ventilation, new iron bed frames that can be properly sanitized, a dedicated nursing staff trained in the latest methods. The mortality rate has dropped by 15%. Hayes spoke with evident pride, running a hand over his silver-streaked beard. "It's remarkable progress, but the board needs to see it. Words on paper don't have the same impact as a good photograph. I completely understand. Visual evidence is persuasive in ways text simply cannot be." Edward began unpacking his equipment, a large format camera, glass plates, and flash powder. "I'll need to set up in the ward beforehand. The flash can startle patients, particularly children." Hayes nodded. "Of course. Nurse Holloway will assist you. She's the head nurse for the children's ward, been with us for 15 years. Formidable woman, but excellent at her job." He chuckled. "The children are terrified of her, but she keeps them alive." Edward would soon learn this was no exaggeration. Catherine Holloway embodied the new professional nurse, educated, disciplined, and utterly devoted to her patients. Her methods might have seemed harsh to outsiders, but in an era when infection claimed so many lives, her strict adherence to cleanliness and order saved countless children. When Edward met her an hour later, his first impression was of a woman carved from stone, tall and angular, with steel-gray hair pulled severely beneath her cap. Nurse Holloway regarded him with open skepticism. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice as crisp as her apron, "Dr. Hayes informed me of your assignment. I must emphasize that my priority is the welfare of my patients. Your photography must not disrupt their care or rest. I assure you, Nurse Holloway, I'll be as unobtrusive as possible. I've worked in many hospitals and understand the importance of maintaining routine." She studied him for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Very well. The afternoon meal will be served at noon, medications administered at 1, and rest period begins at 2. You may take your photographs between 3 and 4, when the patients are awake but settled. I will ensure the ward is presentable. Edward recognized the dismissal in her tone. Thank you. I'll return at 3 with my equipment. As he turned to leave, Nurse Holloway added, Mr. Blackwood, you should know we have several critical cases at present. Scarlet fever, 3 children in isolation at the far end of the ward. You are not to photograph them under any circumstances. I understand. I'll focus on the general ward as Dr. Hayes requested. Something flickered in Nurse Holloway's eyes. Concern, perhaps, or something deeper. One more thing, Mr. Blackwood. The children in this ward have suffered enough. They don't need to be reminded of their suffering when they look at your photographs. It was an unusual request from a medical professional. Typically, hospital photographs were meant to be clinical, objective records. But Edward nodded nonetheless. I'll keep that in mind. The exchange left him unsettled as he departed the hospital to prepare his equipment for the afternoon session. There was something Nurse Holloway wasn't telling him. Some undercurrent of tension that seemed at odds with Dr. Hayes's enthusiasm. When Edward returned at precisely 3 o'clock, the children's ward was transformed. The windows had been opened despite the November chill, allowing weak sunlight to penetrate the room. The floors gleamed with fresh polish. Each bed was made with military precision, white sheets folded just so, and every child who was able had been propped up against freshly plumped pillows, faces washed, hair combed. Nurse Holloway stood at the entrance, flanked by 2 younger nurses, Nurse Bennett, a round-faced woman with kind eyes, and Nurse Aldridge, barely 20, and still somewhat awkward in her uniform. Mr. Blackwood, Nurse Holloway said by way of greeting, we're prepared for you. Edward surveyed the ward, impressed by the transformation. 20 iron beds lined the walls, each numbered with a small brass plate. Most were occupied by children ranging from perhaps 5 to 15 years of age. Some looked alert, curious about the stranger with the large camera. Others lay still, their small faces pale against white pillows. At the far end, a screen concealed what must be the isolation area Nurse Holloway had mentioned. You've done an excellent job preparing the ward, Nurse Holloway. Dr. Hayes will be pleased. She acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod. Where would you like to begin? Edward considered the light, the arrangement of the room. I think we should start with a general view of the ward from this end. Then perhaps some smaller groupings of beds with nursing staff in attendance. For the next hour, Edward worked methodically, positioning his camera, preparing plates, and instructing nurses and patients alike to remain still for the long exposures. The children were remarkably cooperative, perhaps accustomed to following orders in this regimented environment. It was during the final photograph that Edward first noticed Elizabeth Collins. She occupied bed number 7. A small figure almost lost in the white linens. Unlike the other children, she hadn't been arranged to face the camera. She lay on her side, facing the wall, only the back of her head visible. Long brown hair spread across the pillow. As Edward prepared the shot, Nurse Holloway positioned herself near bed 7, partially obscuring the girl from view. It seemed deliberate, though Edward couldn't imagine why. He was about to suggest she move slightly when Dr. Hayes entered the ward. Ah, Mr. Blackwood, how goes the documentation? Very well, Doctor. This is our final shot. A view of the main ward with nursing staff in position. Hayes beamed, clearly pleased. Excellent, excellent. Nurse Holloway has everything in perfect order, as always. The head nurse's expression remained impassive, but Edward noticed her hand move slightly, adjusting the blanket on Elizabeth Collins' bed, ensuring it covered the girl completely. Dr. Hayes, Edward said, curiosity getting the better of him. The patient in bed 7, she seems quite still. Should we perhaps exclude that bed from the photograph? A look passed between the doctor and Nurse Holloway, brief but unmistakable. No need, Hayes said, his tone suddenly brisk. Elizabeth is merely sleeping. Her medication often makes her drowsy. Please, continue with your work. Edward nodded, but his photographer's instincts were aroused. There was a story here, something about this particular patient that created tension among the staff. But his job was to take photographs, not investigate hospital politics. He returned his attention to the camera. If everyone could remain perfectly still, please. This exposure will take approximately 30 seconds. The flash powder ignited with a bright flare and a puff of smoke. Edward counted silently, watching the seconds tick by on his pocket watch. The ward was utterly silent. Even the children seemed to understand the importance of stillness. 28, 29, 30. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our session. As Edward began packing his equipment, he noticed Nurse Bennett approaching bed 7 with a medicine tray. She leaned over the motionless figure of Elizabeth Collins, speaking softly, though the girl gave no response. When the young nurse straightened, her expression was troubled. Edward might have dismissed it, but then he saw Nurse Holloway quickly cross to the bed, check the patient herself, and summon Dr. Hayes with a discreet gesture. The three conferred in hushed tones, their body language suggesting concern. Curiosity piqued, Edward deliberately slowed his packing, straining to overhear their conversation. "Third time today," Nurse Bennett was saying. "I'm certain I saw it move." "Impossible," Hayes replied firmly. "It's suggestion, nothing more." The power of imagination affecting perception. Nurse Holloway's response was too quiet to hear, but her rigid posture conveyed disagreement. Hayes shook his head. "We will discuss this in my office, not in the ward. Mr. Blackwood is still present." 3 pairs of eyes turned toward Edward, who quickly pretended to be absorbed in his camera case. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Hayes called, his voice resuming its professional tone, "are you satisfied with the photographs? When might we expect to see the results?" "I'll develop them tomorrow, Doctor. You should have prints by the end of the week." "Excellent. Nurse Holloway will see you out." As the stern nurse escorted him from the ward, Edward couldn't resist asking, "The girl in bed 7, Elizabeth, is it? She seems quite ill." Nurse Holloway's expression remained neutral. "Elizabeth Collins, 12 years old, admitted 3 weeks ago with pneumonia following scarlet fever. Her condition is complex." "I noticed Dr. Hayes seemed concerned just now." The nurse stopped walking, fixing Edward with a penetrating stare. "Mr. Blackwood, in a hospital, patients improve or deteriorate constantly. It is our job to respond accordingly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to my duties." Edward left Ravenswood Hospital that afternoon with 20 exposed plates and a nagging sense of unease. Something about Elizabeth Collins and the staff's reaction to her condition struck him as unusual. But it wasn't until he developed the photographs the following day that the true mystery began to unfold. Edward's darkroom was a converted storage space behind his studio on Washington Street. Here, in the amber light of a filtered lamp, he processed his exposed plates one by one, watching as the images emerged from the chemical bath like ghosts materializing from the ether. It was always a moment of truth for a photographer, the revelation of what had actually been captured versus what the eye believed it had seen. The Ravenswood photographs were technically perfect. Edward nodded with professional satisfaction as each image appeared. The wide views of the well-ordered ward, the closer shots of nurses attending to patients, the carefully arranged groupings that would show the hospital board exactly what Dr. Hayes wanted them to see. A modern, efficient children's ward run according to the latest medical principles. It was late afternoon when Edward developed the final plate, the group shot with the 3 nurses positioned among the beds. He watched as the image slowly materialized in the chemical bath, the details emerging gradually from the darkness. The composition was excellent. Nurse Holloway stood center right, her posture commanding even in 2 dimensions. Nurse Bennett was positioned near the front of the ward, her round face serious but kind. Nurse Aldridge stood at the far end, near the screened-off isolation area. The children were neatly arranged in their beds, faces solemn, the iron bed frames gleaming in the gas light. And then Edward saw it. At first he thought it was a flaw in the plate, perhaps a speck of dust or a processing error. But as he leaned closer, peering at bed number 7, he realized what he was seeing. Elizabeth Collins lay as he remembered, facing away from the camera, her long hair spread across the white pillow. But there, amid the strands of dark hair, was something that should not have been there. Something impossible. A face. Edward blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, it was unmistakable. Faint but distinct, a face appeared to be emerging from the pillow itself, gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouth open in what might have been a silent scream or plea. It wasn't Elizabeth's face. It couldn't be, given her position. This face seemed to be rising from beneath her head, as if someone were trapped inside the pillow itself, pressing upward against the fabric. "Good God," Edward whispered, his heart pounding. He carefully lifted the plate from the chemical bath, rinsed it, and held it to the light for closer examination. The face was even more distinct now. Sharp cheekbones, deep-set eyes, a mouth contorted in anguish. It was the face of an adult, not a child. A woman, he thought, though it was difficult to be certain. His first rational thought was double exposure. Perhaps this plate had been accidentally exposed previously with another image. But Edward was meticulously careful with his plates, and he knew this was freshly prepared before the Ravenswood assignment. He considered other explanations, a trick of light and shadow perhaps, or an unusual pattern in the pillow fabric that his mind was interpreting as a face. Humans were predisposed to see faces in random patterns. It was a well-documented phenomenon. But the longer Edward studied the image, the more convinced he became that what he was seeing was no illusion. The face was too detailed, too specific, too intentional. And suddenly, the hushed conversation he had overheard made sense. "I'm certain I saw it move," Nurse Bennett had said. They knew. The hospital staff knew there was something unnatural about Elizabeth Collins's bed, about her pillow. Edward hung the plate to dry alongside the others, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do with this information? Should he inform Dr. Hayes? Would anyone even believe him? He decided to make a print first, evidence that could not be dismissed as imagination. Working quickly, he prepared the necessary materials. Within an hour, he had a perfect print of the photograph, the mysterious face on the pillow reproduced in unsettling detail. Edward sat at his workbench, studying the print under strong light, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As a photographer, he prided himself on his rational approach to his craft. Photography was science, not mysticism, a chemical process that recorded reality, not fantasy. And yet here was something that defied rational explanation. Lost in contemplation, he barely registered the knocking at his studio door until it grew insistent. Reluctantly, he covered the print with a cloth and went to answer. Standing on his doorstep, her gray cloak beaded with light rain, was Nurse Sarah Bennett from Ravenswood Hospital. Her round face was pale, her eyes wide with what looked like fear. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you about today's photographs. May I come in?" Edward hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Of course, Nurse Bennett. Is something wrong?" The young nurse entered, unwinding her scarf with trembling fingers. She glanced nervously around the studio before speaking. "Have you developed the plates from Ravenswood yet?" "I've just finished, actually. The prints aren't ready, but—" "The last photograph," she interrupted. "The one with all three of us nurses. Have you examined it closely?" Edward studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. "Why don't you tell me what you expect me to find, Nurse Bennett?" She took a deep breath. "Elizabeth Collins, bed number 7. Did you notice anything unusual about her pillow?" The confirmation sent a chill through Edward. "You know about the face." Nurse Bennett closed her eyes briefly, a small sound escaping her lips. Relief or confirmation of dread, he couldn't tell which. "Then I'm not imagining it. It's real." "What exactly is it that I've photographed, Nurse Bennett?" She twisted her scarf in her hands. "I don't know. None of us do. It started 3 days ago. Elizabeth was already very ill, pneumonia following scarlet fever, as Nurse Holloway probably told you. Her fever was dangerously high. We were taking turns sponging her with alcohol to bring her temperature down." Edward nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I was on the night shift. Around 2 in the morning, Elizabeth became agitated, thrashing in her sleep, mumbling words I couldn't understand. I went to check her temperature, and as I leaned over, she paused, swallowing hard. I saw something move in her pillow, just for an instant, a ripple as if something underneath was trying to push through." "You saw a face?" Edward asked. "Not then, just movement. I thought I was overtired, seeing things after 12 hours on my feet. But the next night it happened again. This time, Nurse Aldridge saw it too, like a face pressing up from inside the pillow, right beneath Elizabeth's head. We reported it to Nurse Holloway, who examined the pillow thoroughly. She found nothing unusual, just feathers and ticking, same as all our pillows." "And Dr. Hayes?" Nurse Bennett's expression darkened. "He dismisses it as feminine hysteria, says we're overtired and suggestible, seeing patterns where none exist." She looked directly at Edward. "But you saw it too, in your photograph, and a camera cannot be accused of hysteria." Edward went to his workbench and removed the cloth covering the print. "This is what I found," he said, handing it to her. Nurse Bennett stared at the image, her face draining of color. "Yes, that's exactly what we saw. But in person, it moves, changes expression. Sometimes it seems to be screaming, other times pleading. Has Elizabeth mentioned seeing or feeling anything unusual? That's just it. She's been unconscious or delirious for days. Her fever rises and falls, but she hasn't been lucid since the face appeared." She returned the photograph with shaking hands. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm frightened. Not just for Elizabeth, but for all of us. Whatever this is, it isn't natural. Edward considered his next words carefully. In 1897, science was rapidly replacing superstition, particularly in medical circles. Suggesting supernatural phenomena to hospital administrators would not be well received. And yet, here was evidence of something that defied conventional explanation. "What do you want me to do, Nurse Bennett? I'm just a photographer." "Don't give that photograph to Dr. Hayes," she said firmly. "Not yet. Help me understand what's happening first. Elizabeth is getting worse, not better, and I'm convinced it's connected to whatever that is. How could I possibly help? I have no medical knowledge." Nurse Bennett leaned forward, her voice urgent. "But you have expertise in photography, in capturing images that others miss, and you have no professional reputation at stake if you ask uncomfortable questions." She hesitated. "There's something else. Something about Elizabeth's admission that troubles me." "What is it?" "She didn't come to us as most patients do. 3 weeks ago, a woman brought her to Ravenswood in the middle of the night, claimed to be her aunt, though they share no resemblance. She said Elizabeth had fallen ill suddenly, paid 3 months' fees in advance, and left without giving an address. We haven't seen her since." Edward frowned. "That does seem unusual. Elizabeth had no personal belongings except the clothes she wore and a small locket with a woman's portrait inside. No family has visited her. The address in our records doesn't exist. I checked myself." Nurse Bennett twisted her hands together. "I believe someone wanted to hide her at Ravenswood. And now this phenomenon with her pillow. It can't be coincidence." The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the studio windows. In the fading autumn light, Nurse Bennett looked young and vulnerable, despite her professional attire. Edward felt a responsibility forming, an obligation to this earnest young nurse and the mysterious patient in her care. "Very well," he said after a moment. "I'll help you investigate, but we must be discreet. Dr. Hayes is expecting these photographs by the end of the week, and I can't afford to lose his commission or my reputation." Relief flooded Nurse Bennett's face. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I knew you would understand. Few others would believe what we've seen. I'll need to know more about Elizabeth, her condition, her treatment, anything unusual that's happened since her arrival, and I want to see the pillow for myself. I'm on duty tomorrow night. Come after 8. Most of the senior staff will have left by then. I'll find a way to get you into the ward." She rose to leave, rewrapping her scarf. "Mr. Blackwood, do you believe in spirits? In the idea that the dead might not always rest peacefully?" The question hung in the air between them. Edward had photographed deceased subjects many times. The Victorian practice of memorializing the dead through photography was common enough, but he had never encountered anything that suggested consciousness beyond death. "I believe there are many things science has yet to explain, Nurse Bennett, and I believe what my camera has captured is real, whatever it may be." She nodded, satisfied with his diplomatic answer. "Until tomorrow night, then. And please tell no one about this, especially not Dr. Hayes or Nurse Holloway." After she departed, Edward returned to his dark room, staring at the drying plate with its impossible image. In the amber light, the face in Elizabeth's pillow seemed to watch him, its hollow eyes following his movements. It was surely an illusion, a trick of light and shadow, and yet as Edward prepared the remaining prints for Ravenswood Hospital, he carefully set aside the one containing the mysterious face. Some truths, he decided, were not ready to be shared, at least not until he understood what he was actually seeing. The following evening, Edward arrived at Ravenswood Hospital precisely at 8 o'clock. The grand brick building looked different at night, more forbidding, its windows glowing with gaslight that did little to dispel the November darkness. He carried his camera bag, though he had no official reason to be there. It provided both cover and equipment should he need to document anything further. Nurse Bennett met him at a side entrance used by staff, her expression both relieved and anxious. "You came," she whispered, ushering him inside. "I was afraid you might reconsider." "I said I would help," Edward replied simply. The hospital corridors were quieter at night, though not silent. The sounds of coughing, occasional moans, and the soft footsteps of night nurses created a somber backdrop to their mission. "How is Elizabeth today?" Sarah Bennett's face tightened. "Worse. Her fever has risen again, and she's having difficulty breathing. Dr. Matthews, the night physician, has ordered steam treatments, but they've had little effect, and the manifestation is more pronounced. You've seen the face again?" She nodded, leading him up a narrow staircase. "Twice today. Nurse Aldridge saw it as well. Nurse Holloway refuses to acknowledge it, but I've noticed she won't go near bed 7 unless absolutely necessary. They reached the children's ward, which was dimly lit to allow patients to sleep. A single nurse, presumably Nurse Aldridge, sat at a desk near the entrance, reading by lamplight. She looked up as they entered, her young face registering surprise at seeing Edward. "It's all right, Mary," Nurse Bennett said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood is helping us with Elizabeth. I've explained everything." The younger nurse glanced nervously around the ward. "She's been restless for the past hour, talking in her sleep again." "What does she say?" Edward asked, setting down his camera bag. "It's hard to make out. Mostly just fragments. Don't let her. It's coming through," things like that. Nurse Aldridge shivered despite the ward's warmth. "Sometimes she speaks in what sounds like another language entirely." Sarah Bennett touched Edward's arm. "Come, I want you to see for yourself." They moved quietly through the ward, past the sleeping forms of children in their iron beds. Some slept peacefully, others tossed restlessly, small coughs and whimpers punctuating the stillness. Edward felt like an intruder in this nocturnal world of childhood suffering. Bed number 7 was partially screened off from the others. As they approached, Edward could hear labored breathing, the distinctive rattle of fluid in lungs that often preceded pneumonia's final stage. Sarah Bennett carefully drew back the screen, revealing Elizabeth Collins. In the dim light, the 12-year-old looked skeletal, her skin stretched tight over facial bones, lips tinged with blue. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, spread across the white pillow just as it had been in the photograph. Her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, caught in some feverish dream. She was a healthy child before this, Sarah whispered. Her aunt said she had never been seriously ill until the fever struck. Edward studied the girl, then let his gaze move to the pillow beneath her head. Nothing unusual was immediately apparent, just white hospital linen, slightly yellowed with age and use. When does it appear? The face? There's no pattern we've been able to determine. Sometimes when her fever spikes, sometimes when she's particularly agitated. Once when Dr. Matthews was examining her. Edward removed his camera from its bag. "I'd like to take another photograph if possible. Perhaps a closer view of the pillow area." Sarah Bennett hesitated. "We'd need to use flash powder. It would wake the other children." "What about moving her? Is there a separate room where we could examine her more closely?" The nurses exchanged glances. "The isolation room is empty at present," Nurse Aldridge said slowly. "The last scarlet fever case was released yesterday, but we'd need Dr. Matthews's permission to move a patient." "Where is Dr. Matthews now?" "Making rounds in the men's surgical ward. He won't return for at least an hour." Edward made a decision. "Let's move her, just temporarily. If the doctor returns, you can say you relocated her to better monitor her breathing." It wasn't proper protocol, and Edward could see the nurses' professional instincts warring with their concern for Elizabeth and their curiosity about the mysterious phenomenon. Finally, Sarah nodded. "We'll need the wheeled stretcher. Mary, can you fetch it without being noticed?" While Nurse Aldridge slipped away to retrieve the stretcher, Sarah began preparing Elizabeth for transport, checking her pulse and temperature, adjusting her blankets. Edward noticed she was careful not to touch the pillow directly. "Has anyone examined the pillow itself? Removed the case, inspected the stuffing?" Sarah nodded. "Nurse Holloway did, the day after we first reported seeing the face. She found nothing unusual, just the standard hospital pillow filled with feathers. She replaced it with a new one, but..." She trailed off, her expression troubled. "But what?" "The face appeared in the new pillow as well. It's as if it's not in the pillow at all, but somehow manifesting through it, using it as a portal of sorts." The notion sent a chill through Edward. He was a modern man, committed to rational thought and scientific progress. And yet here he was, investigating what appeared to be a supernatural phenomenon in one of Boston's most respected hospitals. Nurse Aldridge returned with the stretcher, and together the three of them carefully transferred Elizabeth from her bed. The girl moaned softly but didn't wake. They placed her pillow beneath her head. Edward noted that neither nurse seemed eager to touch it, and covered her with blankets. "The isolation room is this way," Sarah said, guiding the stretcher toward a door at the far end of the ward. "It has its own gas line for better lighting." The isolation room was small but well equipped, with a single iron bed, a wash stand, and various medical implements arranged on a side table. Most importantly, it offered privacy. Edward could photograph the girl and her mysterious pillow without disturbing other patients or attracting unwanted attention from hospital staff. They transferred Elizabeth to the bed, positioning her as comfortably as possible. Edward set up his camera while Sarah adjusted the gas lamps to provide better lighting. Her breathing seems worse, Nurse Aldridge commented, placing a stethoscope against Elizabeth's chest. There's significant congestion in both lungs. Should we call for Dr. Matthews? Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. Let me take a few photographs first, Edward said. Then you can return her to the ward. He positioned his camera carefully, focusing on Elizabeth's head and the pillow beneath it. The girl's face was flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Nothing unusual appeared in the pillow at that moment. It looked like ordinary hospital bedding, slightly indented by the weight of the child's head. It's not visible now, Sarah said, disappointment evident in her voice. Perhaps it only appears under certain conditions. I'll take a photograph anyway, Edward decided. Sometimes the camera captures what the eye misses. He prepared a plate and was about to expose it when Elizabeth suddenly stiffened. Her back arched slightly, her fingers clutched at the blanket, and a low moan escaped her lips. All three adults froze, watching as the girl's eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids. Don't, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. Don't let her through. Sarah moved quickly to the bedside, placing a cool hand on Elizabeth's forehead. Shh, you're safe. No one's gonna hurt you. Elizabeth's next words emerged in a voice that sounded nothing like a 12-year-old girl. Deep, raspy, with an accent Edward couldn't identify, she said, She's coming. She's found a way back. And then, before their astonished eyes, the surface of the pillow began to shift. It was subtle at first, a slight ripple in the fabric, as if something beneath was stirring. Then gradually, a form began to take shape, the impression of a face, pushing upward from within the pillow itself. My God, Edward whispered, abandoning his camera to move closer. It's actually happening. The face became more distinct with each passing second. Hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes, a mouth that appeared to be moving, though no sound emerged. It was the same face Edward had captured in his photograph, but dynamic, changing, alive in some impossible way. Who are you? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. What do you want with this child? For a moment, the face seemed to turn toward her, its expression shifting from anguish to something like recognition. The mouth moved again, forming words they couldn't hear. The camera, Edward said suddenly, returning to his equipment. I need to capture this. He worked quickly, preparing the flash powder while keeping one eye on the extraordinary scene before him. The face in the pillow was now fully formed, its features so distinct that it seemed impossible the others had ever doubted its existence. It was a woman's face. He could see now, middle-aged perhaps, with sharp features and an expression of desperate urgency. Ready? He announced, positioning the camera. Don't move. The flash powder ignited with a bright flare, momentarily illuminating the room in harsh white light. In that instant, several things happened simultaneously. Elizabeth screamed, a high, terrified sound that seemed to come from the depths of her being. The face in the pillow opened its mouth wide, as if joining in the scream, though no sound came from it. And the door to the isolation room burst open, revealing Nurse Catherine Holloway, her imposing figure silhouetted against the light from the ward beyond. What is the meaning of this? Or she demanded, taking in the scene before her. The photographer, the unauthorized movement of a patient, the still dissipating cloud from the flash powder. Nurse Bennett, Nurse Aldridge, explain yourselves immediately. Edward moved to intervene, but Sarah stepped forward first. Nurse Holloway, we can explain. We were documenting Elizabeth's condition for the medical record. Mr. Blackwood has captured something unusual that may help us understand her illness. Nurse Holloway's eyes narrowed as she moved to the bedside, checking Elizabeth's pulse and breathing. The face in the pillow had vanished the instant the flash powder ignited, leaving no evidence of its existence except, hopefully, on Edward's photographic plate. This patient is critically ill. She should not have been moved without a doctor's authorization. Nurse Holloway's voice was cold with anger. And you, she turned to Edward, have no business being in this hospital after visiting ours, much less photographing patients without permission. It was my idea, Sarah said quickly. I asked Mr. Blackwood to come. We've seen something unusual, something that may be affecting Elizabeth's condition. The face in the pillow. Enough, Nurse Holloway cut her off sharply. I will not have my nurses spreading superstitious nonsense. This child is suffering from pneumonia, not some supernatural affliction. Return her to the ward immediately, then report to Dr. Matthews's office. Both of you. She glared at the younger nurses. As for you, Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you leave before I call for hospital security. Edward knew better than to argue. Nurse Holloway's authority in the children's ward was absolute, and he had clearly overstepped professional boundaries. But he had what he came for: a new photograph of the mysterious face, captured at the peak of its manifestation. "I'll go," he said, gathering his equipment. "But Nurse Holloway, I've seen it too. Whatever is happening to Elizabeth Collins isn't just fever or delirium. There's something in that pillow, something that appears in photographs and to the naked eye." For a brief moment, something flickered across Catherine Holloway's stern features. Not surprise, Edward realized, but recognition. "She knows," he thought suddenly. "She's seen it too." "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," was all she said, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. Edward had no choice but to depart, leaving the nurses to return Elizabeth to her bed in the ward. As he descended the hospital's main staircase, his mind raced with questions. What exactly had he witnessed? What was the connection between Elizabeth Collins and the face in her pillow? And why did Nurse Holloway seem determined to suppress all mention of it? Outside, the November night was cold and misty, gas lamps creating halos in the fog that shrouded Boston's streets. Edward walked quickly toward his studio, eager to develop the new photographic plate. Perhaps it would provide answers that had eluded them in the isolation room. He was so preoccupied with these thoughts that he almost missed the figure watching him from across the street. A woman in a dark cloak, her face obscured by a heavy veil. She stood perfectly still beneath a street lamp, her attention fixed unmistakably on Edward. He slowed his pace, curious and slightly unsettled. The woman made no move to approach or retreat, simply watching as he passed. Something about her posture, rigid, alert, intensely focused, raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Edward hesitated, then changed direction, crossing the street toward her. As he approached, the woman finally moved, turning to walk quickly away into the fog. "Wait," Edward called. "Do you have business with me?" The woman paused, looking back over her shoulder. Though he couldn't see her face clearly through the veil, her voice when she spoke was unexpectedly young and refined. "You've seen it, haven't you? The face in Elizabeth Collins' pillow." Edward stopped in his tracks, astonished. "Who are you? How do you know about that?" "I know many things about Elizabeth Collins, and about the woman trying to reach her." The veiled figure took a step closer. "You have a photograph, don't you? You've captured her image. How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been waiting for her to appear. For 3 years I've been waiting." The woman's voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to see that photograph. Lives depend on it, including Elizabeth's." Edward studied the mysterious woman, weighing his options. His rational mind warned him to be cautious. This could be an elaborate hoax or the delusion of an unstable mind. But after what he had witnessed in the hospital, he was less certain about the boundaries between the possible and impossible. "Come to my studio," he decided. "I need to develop the plate I took tonight. If it shows what I think it will, we can discuss this further." The woman nodded. "Thank you. You won't regret this." They walked in silence through Boston's fog-shrouded streets, the woman maintaining a careful distance. Edward found himself acutely aware of her presence, the rustle of her cloak, the light tap of her boots on the cobblestones. Who was she? What was her connection to Elizabeth Collins and the strange manifestation in the hospital pillow? At his Washington Street studio, Edward lit the lamps and stoked the small stove to take the chill from the air. The veiled woman stood just inside the door, as if reluctant to commit fully to entering his space. "I'll need to work in my darkroom," Edward explained, removing his coat. "The developing process takes time and requires complete darkness except for a filtered lamp. You're welcome to wait here." "May I accompany you?" the woman asked. "I have some experience with photographic processes." Edward hesitated. His darkroom was his sanctuary, a private space where he practiced the alchemy of his craft. But something in the woman's voice, an urgency, a need, persuaded him. "Very well, but you must follow my instructions precisely. Any exposure to white light will ruin the plate." In the amber glow of the darkroom, the woman finally removed her veil. Edward caught his breath. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, with delicate features and intelligent eyes that appeared amber in the filtered light. There was something familiar about her face, though he was certain they had never met. "You have questions," she said, watching as he prepared the chemicals for developing. "I'll answer what I can. But first I need to know exactly what you saw at Ravenswood Hospital." Edward described the events of the evening, Elizabeth's deteriorating condition, the face that had manifested in the pillow, Nurse Holloway's intervention. As he spoke, he worked methodically, preparing the plate for development. The face was clearly that of a woman, he concluded, lowering the plate into the chemical bath. Middle-aged, gaunt, with an expression of desperation. Elizabeth spoke just before it appeared, said something about "she's coming through" in a voice that wasn't her own. The woman closed her eyes briefly. "It's happening faster than I feared. The boundary is thinning." "What boundary? Who is this woman trying to reach Elizabeth?" She watched intently as the image began to form on the plate. "Her name is Eleanor Pruitt, and she has every reason to be desperate, Mr. Blackwood. She was buried alive 3 years ago." The statement hung in the amber air between them. Edward's hands stilled over the chemical bath. "That's impossible." "I assure you it's not. In fact, it happens more often than most people realize. Catalepsy, trance states, conditions that mimic death so convincingly that even physicians are fooled. Eleanor suffered from such a condition. She appeared to die suddenly. No pulse, no breath, cold to the touch. The doctor pronounced her dead, and she was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery 2 days later." "Even if that were true," Edward said, struggling to process this incredible claim, "how could she possibly be manifesting in a hospital pillow 3 years later? And what is her connection to Elizabeth Collins?" "Elizabeth is her daughter." The image on the plate was fully formed now. The isolation room at Ravenswood Hospital, Elizabeth's small figure on the bed, and emerging from the pillow beneath her head, the face that had so disturbed Edward and the nurses. In the photograph it was even more distinct than in his first image. A woman's face contorted in what might have been pain or desperate effort, her mouth open as if in mid-speech. "My God," the woman whispered, staring at the developing image. "It really is her. Eleanor." Edward carefully lifted the plate from the chemical bath and rinsed it. "You recognize her? You knew this woman?" "She was my sister." The simple statement explained the nagging sense of familiarity Edward had felt upon seeing the woman's face. There was a resemblance between her and the gaunt visage in the photograph, something in the structure of the cheekbones, the set of the eyes. "Your sister, Eleanor Pruitt, and you are Charlotte Pruitt. I've spent the last 3 years trying to prove that Eleanor was buried alive, that she might somehow still be alive." Charlotte's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the photographic plate, not quite touching it. "Everyone thought I was mad with grief, inventing fantasies to avoid accepting her death, but I knew she wasn't truly dead." "Miss Pruitt," Edward said gently, "even if your sister was mistakenly declared dead, no one could survive 3 years in a buried coffin. It's simply not possible. I'm not suggesting she's still physically alive in her coffin, Mr. Blackwood. I'm suggesting something far stranger." Charlotte met his gaze directly. "My sister had certain abilities, sensitivities that most people lack. She could sense things others couldn't, know things she shouldn't have been able to know. Our grandmother had the same gift. In life, Eleanor fought against it, tried to suppress it. But in that space between life and death," she gestured toward the photographic plate, "I believe her consciousness has found a way to reach out, to connect with her daughter." Edward hung the plate to dry, his mind grappling with the implications of Charlotte's theory. It defied everything he understood about life, death, and the physical world. And yet, he had seen the face with his own eyes, captured it twice now on photographic plates. "Why the pillow?" he asked. "Why manifest through bedding in a hospital ward?" "I don't know exactly, but Elizabeth has been ill for weeks, hovering in that same liminal space between life and death. Perhaps that creates a thinning of whatever separates our world from wherever Eleanor's consciousness exists now." Charlotte paced the small dark room, her movements betraying her agitation. "Or perhaps it's the feathers." Down feathers were used in Eleanor's burial pillow. She was particular about her bedding. Perhaps there's a material connection that facilitates the manifestation. It sounded like spiritualist nonsense, the kind of pseudoscientific theories that had become fashionable in recent decades. And yet, Edward couldn't dismiss it entirely, not after what he had witnessed at Ravenswood. "You said Elizabeth is Eleanor's daughter, but the hospital records indicate she was brought in by an aunt." Charlotte's expression hardened. "By me. I brought her to Ravenswood 3 weeks ago when she fell ill. I couldn't care for her properly at home, and I feared her stepfather would not seek proper medical attention for her." "Her stepfather?" "James Collins. He married Eleanor a year before she was buried. He gained control of her considerable estate upon her death, including guardianship of Elizabeth." Charlotte's voice was bitter now. "He never wanted the child, only the fortune. When Elizabeth fell ill with scarlet fever, he was content to let her suffer without proper care. I took her in the night and brought her to Ravenswood under an assumed relationship. Does he know she's here? Not yet, but he's been searching. That's why I gave no forwarding address, why I paid in advance. I needed to keep Elizabeth safe while I continued my investigation into Eleanor's burial. Charlotte moved closer to the drying plate, studying the ghostly image. But now everything has changed. Eleanor is trying to reach her daughter. Trying to warn her, I think. Warn her of what? I don't know exactly. But in the weeks before her apparent death, Eleanor was afraid. She told me she feared for Elizabeth's safety, that James was not the man she thought she had married. She was planning to leave him, to take Elizabeth away. Charlotte turned to face Edward directly. I believe James Collins may have had something to do with Eleanor's sudden death. The implication was clear and disturbing. You think he murdered your sister? I think he might have administered something to induce the cataleptic state that was mistaken for death. Eleanor had episodes of catalepsy before, minor ones, usually brought on by extreme stress. If James knew about this condition, he could have exploited it. It was an extraordinary accusation, and yet it connected the disparate elements of this bizarre case in a way that made a certain terrible sense. A mother, possibly murdered and buried alive, desperately trying to reach her daughter from beyond the grave. A child falling mysteriously ill. A stepfather with financial motives for wanting both of them gone. If what you're suggesting is true, Edward said slowly, then Elizabeth may be in danger even at Ravenswood. Charlotte nodded grimly. Exactly. If James discovers her whereabouts, he might attempt to ensure she never recovers from her illness. A grieving widower losing his stepdaughter to the same fever that took her mother months earlier would arouse no suspicion. We need evidence, Edward decided, his mind shifting to practical concerns. Your theory about your sister's burial might be correct, but without proof, no one will act on it. Certainly not the authorities. That's why I've been trying to secure an exhumation order, Charlotte explained. But without evidence or family support, James has blocked my every attempt as next of kin. The courts won't approve it. I need something tangible, something that proves Eleanor was conscious when buried. Edward glanced at the drying photographic plate. This image proves something unusual is happening, but it won't convince a judge to exhume a 3-year-old grave. We need to connect Eleanor's manifestation directly to her burial. Charlotte was silent for a moment, her face thoughtful in the amber light. There might be a way, she said finally. Elizabeth has been speaking in her delirium, fragments that made little sense to the nurses but might contain information only Eleanor would know. If we could question her during one of these episodes, while the manifestation is present, you want to try to communicate directly with your sister through Elizabeth. Not through Elizabeth, through the manifestation itself. Charlotte's eyes were bright with a fervor that bordered on obsession. If that truly is Eleanor's consciousness pushing through from wherever she is, then she might be able to tell us exactly what happened to her, where to find evidence of James's crimes. The idea sent a shiver through Edward. What Charlotte was proposing ventured beyond photography into the realm of spiritualism and seances, practices he had always regarded with scientific skepticism. And yet, he had seen the impossible with his own eyes. The face in the pillow was real, whatever its source or explanation. Even if we wanted to attempt this, he said practically, how would we gain access to Elizabeth? After tonight, I doubt Nurse Holloway will allow either of us near the children's ward. There's someone else who might help us, Charlotte said. Nurse Bennett. She's seen the manifestation multiple times and believes it's connected to Elizabeth's condition. If we shared what we know about Eleanor and James Collins, she might be persuaded to assist us. Edward nodded slowly. The young nurse had already demonstrated her willingness to bend hospital rules in search of answers. I can contact her tomorrow. But, Miss Pruitt, I must caution you. If your theory about your sister's burial is correct, and if James Collins is indeed responsible, we may be placing ourselves in considerable danger by investigating further. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. I've been in danger since the day I began questioning Eleanor's death, Mr. Blackwood. It hasn't deterred me yet, and it won't now. Not when I'm closer than ever to the truth. She looked again at the photographic plate, at the desperate face emerging from Elizabeth's pillow. My sister is trying to tell us something important. I intend to listen, whatever the risk. In the amber glow of the dark room, surrounded by the chemical sense of his craft, Edward Blackwood made a decision that would alter the course of his life. Very well, Miss Pruitt. I'll help you communicate with your sister, or whatever it is manifesting in that hospital pillow. But we proceed with caution, and at the first sign that Elizabeth might be harmed by our investigation, we stop immediately. Charlotte nodded her agreement. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I've been alone in this search for so long. It gives me hope to finally have an ally who has seen the truth with his own eyes. As they left the darkroom, the developed plate secure and drying, Edward couldn't help but wonder what truth exactly he had seen, and what darker truths might still be waiting to be uncovered. The following day dawned gray and cold, a typical November morning in Boston. Edward spent the early hours printing the photographs Dr. Hayes had commissioned, carefully excluding the one that showed the face in Elizabeth's pillow. He would deliver these to Ravenswood Hospital as agreed, maintaining the professional relationship while pursuing his separate investigation with Charlotte Pruitt. He had sent a message to Nurse Bennett at her boarding house, requesting a meeting at a small cafe near the hospital before her afternoon shift. The note was deliberately vague, mentioning only that he had important information regarding Elizabeth Collins' condition. As he worked in his studio, Edward found his thoughts returning repeatedly to Charlotte Pruitt and her extraordinary claims. There was a part of him, the rational scientific part, that still sought conventional explanations for what he had witnessed. Perhaps the face in the pillow was a product of shared delusion, a psychological phenomenon amplified by suggestion and expectation. Perhaps Elizabeth's illness had natural, medical causes unrelated to any supernatural manifestation. And yet, the photographs didn't lie. Twice now, his camera had captured a woman's face emerging from the hospital pillow, a face Charlotte had instantly recognized as her sister's. Whatever was happening transcended simple explanation and demanded investigation. At noon, Edward delivered the commissioned photographs to Dr. Hayes's office at Ravenswood Hospital. The superintendent was delighted with the results, particularly the final group shot showing the 3 nurses positioned among the well-ordered beds. Excellent work, Mr. Blackwood, Hayes said, examining each print with approval. These will make a powerful impression on the board. One can practically feel the efficiency and modern methods at work. Edward nodded, accepting the praise while wondering if Hayes would feel differently if he knew what else the photographer had captured. I'm glad you're satisfied, Doctor. I aim to show the ward at its best. You've succeeded admirably. Nurse Holloway maintains the highest standards. As you can see, Hayes placed the photographs in a folder for his upcoming presentation. I understand you were at the hospital again last night? Something about additional photographs requested by one of our junior nurses? The question was asked casually, but Edward sensed a hidden tension behind it. Clearly, Nurse Holloway had reported the unauthorized session in the isolation room. A misunderstanding, Edward said smoothly. Nurse Bennett had questions about photographic documentation for medical records. I came to offer advice, but it seems proper protocols weren't followed. I apologize for any disruption. Hayes studied him for a moment. Yes, well, hospital procedures exist for good reason, Mr. Blackwood. Our patients' welfare is our primary concern, particularly in the children's ward. Of course, it won't happen again. The doctor nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. Well then, that concludes our business. I'll make sure your final payment is processed promptly. As Edward turned to leave, Hayes added, almost as an afterthought, the Collins girl, the patient in bed 7. Her condition has stabilized somewhat this morning. The crisis appears to have passed. That's good news, Edward replied, careful to show only appropriate professional interest. I hope she continues to improve. Indeed, children are remarkably resilient, even in the face of serious illness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have rounds to make. Outside Hayes's office, Edward paused, considering this new information. If Elizabeth's condition had improved, what did that mean for the manifestation Charlotte believed was her sister trying to communicate? Would it fade as the girl recovered, taking with it any chance of discovering the truth about Eleanor Pruitt's death? Lost in thought, he nearly collided with Nurse Holloway as she emerged from a nearby room. Mr. Blackwood, she said coldly, I trust you've concluded your business with Dr. Hayes. I have, just delivering the commissioned photographs. She regarded him with undisguised suspicion. And that is the extent of your interest in Ravenswood Hospital? Professional photography only? The question was pointed, challenging. Edward met her gaze directly. I take my commissions seriously, Nurse Holloway. I also take seriously what I observe through my camera lens. Something flickered in her stern features. Not quite uncertainty, but perhaps a crack in her rigid professional facade. What you think you observed last night was a product of poor lighting and overwrought imagination. Nothing more. Then you didn't see it? Edward asked quietly. The face in Elizabeth Collins's pillow? Because your reaction suggested otherwise. Nurse Holloway glanced quickly around the corridor, ensuring they were alone before responding in a lowered voice. Mr. Blackwood, I have been a nurse for 25 years. I have seen many strange things in sick rooms. Phenomena that accompany high fever, delirium, and the approach of death. Patients who see departed loved ones at their bedside. Shadows that seem to move independently. Inexplicable sounds and sensations. And faces emerging from pillows? Her lips tightened. I have learned that such phenomena are best not discussed, best not acknowledged. To do so only gives them power and distracts from the real work of healing. It wasn't the denial Edward had expected. In fact, it seemed closer to confirmation that Nurse Holloway had indeed witnessed something unusual in Elizabeth's bed. What if these phenomena are trying to communicate something important? He pressed. Something related to the patient's condition or circumstances? Then they should find clearer methods of communication. She replied sharply. Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what notions Nurse Bennett has shared with you, but I strongly advise you to conclude your business at Ravenswood and leave matters of medical care to medical professionals. She straightened her already impeccable uniform. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. As she marched away down the corridor, Edward was left with the distinct impression that Catherine Holloway knew more than she was willing to admit, not just about the face in the pillow, but perhaps about Elizabeth Collins herself. At 2 o'clock, Edward met Sarah Bennett at the small cafe as arranged. The young nurse looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she had slept poorly after the previous night's events. I wasn't sure you would come, she said, as Edward took the seat opposite her, after Nurse Holloway's reaction. I'm not easily discouraged, Nurse Bennett, especially not when confronted with something as extraordinary as what we witnessed. Edward ordered coffee for them both before continuing in a lowered voice. I've made a rather remarkable discovery about Elizabeth Collins, or rather about the face in her pillow. Sarah leaned forward, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. What have you learned? I met someone last night who recognized the face. She believes it belongs to Eleanor Pruitt, Elizabeth's mother, who allegedly died 3 years ago. According to this source, Mrs. Pruitt may have been buried while still alive, in a cataleptic state that mimicked death. The nurse's eyes widened. My God. And this manifestation is what? Her attempt to communicate from the grave? So it seems. The woman I met is Charlotte Pruitt, Eleanor's sister and Elizabeth's aunt. She's the one who brought Elizabeth to Ravenswood 3 weeks ago, though she registered her under false pretenses to protect her from her stepfather. Sarah absorbed this information, her professional training warring with the extraordinary implications. This is difficult to accept, and yet it would explain the manifestation, the way Elizabeth speaks in a voice not her own. She shook her head. But how could anyone survive being buried? And why would this consciousness be appearing now, 3 years later? Charlotte believes it's connected to Elizabeth's illness, that the girl's condition has created a kind of bridge between our world and wherever her mother's consciousness exists. Edward sipped his coffee, aware of how fantastical this sounded when stated plainly. She also believes Elizabeth's stepfather, James Collins, may have deliberately induced the cataleptic state that led to Eleanor's premature burial, possibly to gain control of her estate. And now he might pose a danger to Elizabeth as well, Sarah concluded, following the logic to its disturbing conclusion. Does he know she's at Ravenswood? Not yet, according to Charlotte, but she fears he's searching for her. The young nurse was quiet for a moment, processing this information. What does Miss Pruitt want to do? Surely she doesn't intend to remove Elizabeth from the hospital. The girl is far too ill to be moved. No, she wants to try to communicate with the manifestation, to learn directly from Eleanor what happened to her, and whether Elizabeth is truly in danger. Edward studied Sarah's reaction carefully. We would need your help to do so. To his surprise, the nurse didn't immediately dismiss the idea as absurd. Elizabeth's condition has stabilized since last night. Her fever has broken, though she remains very weak. Dr. Hayes believes the crisis has passed. She twisted her coffee cup thoughtfully. If what you're saying is true, if this manifestation really is her mother trying to warn or protect her, then perhaps we should listen. You would help us? Sarah met his gaze directly. Mr. Blackwood, I became a nurse to save lives and ease suffering. If Elizabeth Collins is in danger, from her illness or from her stepfather, I can't in good conscience ignore it. She glanced at her watch. I'm due at the hospital in 20 minutes. I'm assigned to the evening shift in the children's ward today, from 3 until 11. Would it be possible for Charlotte and me to see Elizabeth tonight? To attempt communication with the manifestation? The nurse considered this carefully. Nurse Holloway leaves at 7. Dr. Matthews makes his evening rounds at 8. There's a period between 8:30 and 9 when the night staff take their meal break in rotation. I could arrange to be the only nurse in the ward during that time. Half an hour would be enough, Edward said, if the manifestation appears at all. It's been most active in the evening hours, particularly as Elizabeth's fever rises. Even though her overall condition has improved, she still experiences fever spikes in the late afternoon and evening. Sarah finished her coffee and rose to leave. Come to the service entrance at 8:45. I'll watch for you. Edward stood as well, offering his hand. Thank you, Nurse Bennett. I know this is a significant professional risk for you. She shook his hand firmly. Some risks are worth taking, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen too many children die from ignorance and neglect to ignore anything that might help save one. Her expression softened slightly. Besides, I've seen that face with my own eyes. I want to know what it's trying to tell us. As Sarah departed for her shift, Edward felt a growing sense that they were approaching a crucial juncture in this strange affair. Tonight, they would attempt to communicate directly with whatever was manifesting in Elizabeth Collins' pillow, be it the trapped consciousness of her buried mother or something else entirely. He spent the remainder of the afternoon in his studio, developing the plate from the previous night and making a fresh print of the manifestation at its most distinct. The image was even clearer than the first. A woman's face emerging from the pillow beneath Elizabeth's head, features contorted in what appeared to be desperate effort. Looking at it now, Edward could see the family resemblance to Charlotte Pruitt, the same high cheekbones, the same determined set of the jaw. At 7 o'clock, Charlotte arrived at his studio as arranged, dressed in dark clothing suitable for their clandestine hospital visit. She examined the new photograph with intense emotion, one gloved finger tracing the outline of the face in the pillow. It's her, she whispered. It's really Eleanor. I'd know her face anywhere. Are you certain you want to proceed with this? Edward asked, watching her closely. If your sister is truly trying to communicate from wherever she is, the experience may be disturbing. And if your suspicions about James Collins are correct, pursuing this investigation could place us all in danger. Charlotte looked up from the photograph, her expression resolute. I've spent 3 years searching for the truth about Eleanor's death, Mr. Blackwood. I won't turn back now that I'm finally close to answers. She carefully returned the print to his desk. Have you spoken with Nurse Bennett? Edward explained the arrangements for that evening. The half-hour window when they could access the children's ward unobserved. Sarah's willingness to assist them. We should bring something of Eleanor's, Charlotte suggested. An object with personal significance that might strengthen the connection if she's trying to reach through. Do you have such an item? She nodded, reaching into her handbag to produce a small silver locket on a delicate chain. This was Eleanor's. It contains a miniature portrait of Elizabeth as an infant. Eleanor never took it off. It was buried with her. She hesitated, then added, I removed it when I visited her grave last year. I thought Elizabeth should have it someday. Edward didn't comment on the impropriety of removing items from a grave. Under the circumstances, such concerns seemed trivial compared to the possibility that Eleanor Pruitt had been buried alive. Bring it tonight, he agreed. If the manifestation truly is connected to your sister, a personal item might help focus the communication. They arrived at Ravenswood Hospital's service entrance at the appointed time, Charlotte's face concealed beneath a heavy veil. The November night was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds in the air as they waited for Nurse Bennett's signal. At precisely 8:45, the door opened, revealing Sarah's concerned face. Quickly, she whispered, ushering them inside. Dr. Matthews has finished his rounds, and the night staff are at supper. We have 25 minutes at most. She led them through the deserted service corridors, their footsteps eerily loud in the silence. Ravenswood was a different place at night. Shadows stretched longer, gas lamps hissed quietly, and distant sounds. A patient's cough, the clank of a metal pan, a muffled conversation, echoed through the building like ghosts of the day's activities. The children's ward was dimly lit when they entered, only a few lamps burning at low intensity to allow the young patients to sleep. Most of the beds were occupied, small forms lying still beneath blankets, occasionally shifting or coughing in their sleep. Elizabeth is still in bed 7, Sarah whispered, leading them to the familiar location. Her condition has improved since yesterday, but she remains very weak. The fever returns each evening, though not as severely as before. They approached the bed cautiously. In the dim light, Elizabeth Collins looked fragile but less deathly than the previous night. Her breathing was easier, her color improved. She slept restlessly, small movements suggesting dreams or discomfort. Charlotte stood transfixed, staring at her niece with profound emotion. "She looks so much like Eleanor at that age," she murmured. "The same profile, the same delicate features." "Has the manifestation appeared today?" Edward asked Sarah, setting down his camera bag and surveying the bed. "Twice," the nurse confirmed. "Once during afternoon medications, and again when Dr. Matthews examined her. Not as distinct as last night, but definitely present. She spoke again too, said something about running out of time and the other side closing." Charlotte moved closer to the bed, removing the silver locket from her handbag. "We need to try to communicate directly, to ask specific questions." "How exactly do you propose to do that?" Sarah asked, her medical training clearly making her uncomfortable with this unorthodox approach. "Elizabeth is asleep, and the manifestation hasn't appeared yet." "We wake Elizabeth," Charlotte said decisively. "Her fever state seems to facilitate the manifestation. If she's partially conscious but still feverish, Eleanor might be able to reach through more easily." Edward and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. "Deliberately disturbing a sick child's rest goes against everything I've been trained to do," the nurse protested. "I understand your concern," Charlotte replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But Elizabeth's life may depend on what we learn tonight. If James Collins is searching for her, and if he's responsible for Eleanor's death, we don't have the luxury of waiting for the manifestation to appear spontaneously." Sarah hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll wake her, but gently. And at the first sign of distress, we stop immediately." She leaned over the sleeping child, speaking softly. "Elizabeth? Elizabeth, can you hear me? I need you to wake up for a few minutes." The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Sarah continued speaking soothingly, gradually bringing her to consciousness. Finally, Elizabeth's eyes opened, dark, fever-bright, and somewhat unfocused. "Nurse Bennett," she murmured, her voice weak and confused. "Is it time for medicine?" "No, dear. There's someone here who wants to speak with you. Your Aunt Charlotte." Elizabeth turned her head slightly, gazing at Charlotte with uncertain recognition. "Aunt Charlotte? Where am I?" Charlotte moved to the bedside, taking the girl's small hand in her own. "You're in the hospital, Elizabeth. You've been very ill, but you're getting better now." She stroked the child's hair gently. "I need to ask you something important. The lady you sometimes see or hear when you're sleeping. Has she spoken to you? Has she told you anything?" Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "You know about her? The lady in the pillow?" "Yes, dear. I know about her." Charlotte's voice trembled slightly. "She's trying to tell you something important. Do you remember what it is?" The girl's gaze drifted, becoming unfocused again. "She's trapped. She says she's trapped in the dark, cold, can't breathe." Elizabeth's small hand clutched Charlotte's more tightly. "She says he did it to her, that he'll do it to me too." "Who, Elizabeth? Who will do it to you?" "Father James." The child's voice had changed subtly, still high and young, but with an undertone of adult urgency. "She says don't trust Father James. He wants the money, wants it all." Charlotte and Edward exchanged glances. James Collins, Elizabeth's stepfather, just as Charlotte had suspected. "Elizabeth," Charlotte continued gently, "does the lady tell you how she's trapped? Where she is?" The girl's eyes closed, her breathing becoming more labored. For a moment Edward feared she had fallen back asleep, but then she spoke again, her voice now alarmingly adult with an accent and timbre that didn't belong to a 12-year-old girl. "Buried. He buried me. The powder in my tea. Bitter, metallic. Then darkness. Waking in the coffin." Elizabeth's body stiffened, her back arching slightly. "Scratched until my fingers bled. No air, no escape. Darkness." Charlotte let out a small sound of distress, but pressed on. "Eleanor, is that you? Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes snapped open, but they weren't focusing on Charlotte or anything else in the room. They stared upward, fixed on something none of them could see. "Charlotte, sister?" The voice was entirely Eleanor's now, a woman's voice emerging from a child's throat. "You found her. You protected her." "Yes, Eleanor. Elizabeth is safe for now. But I need to know, what did James do to you? How can I prove it?" As Elizabeth, or Eleanor, began to answer, Sarah gasped and pointed at the pillow. The surface was moving, rippling as if something beneath was struggling to emerge. Gradually, the now familiar face began to take shape, gaunt, desperate. the same face Edward had captured in his photographs. "My diaries," the voice said, as the face in the pillow formed the same words in silent synchrony. "Hidden in the oak floor, third board from the fireplace. He never found them. The symptoms, documented them all. The metallic taste, the numbness, recorded his words when he thought I slept. The face in the pillow contorted with effort or pain. Arsenic, regular doses. Then something else that last night. Something that stopped my heart." Edward had retrieved his camera and was quickly preparing a plate, determined to document this extraordinary communication. The face in the pillow was now fully formed, moving in precise coordination with the words coming from Elizabeth's mouth. "James knows I kept records. Still searching for them." The voice grew more urgent. "He suspects Elizabeth knows. That's why he let her sicken. Convenient if she died of fever. Natural causes." Charlotte was weeping silently, still clutching her niece's hand. "I'll find the diaries, Eleanor. I'll expose what he did to you." "Not safe," the voice insisted. "He's coming. Followed you to the hospital yesterday. Knows she's here." Edward's hands froze in the process of preparing his camera. "Someone was watching the hospital last night. James. Saw you leave. Followed you to your studio." The face in the pillow turned slightly, seeming to look directly at Edward. "He knows about the photographs. Knows what you've seen." A chill ran through Edward as he recalled the sense of being watched as he left the hospital the previous night. He had attributed the sensation to nerves and the unsettling events he'd witnessed. But if James Collins had followed him, had seen him with Charlotte, "He'll come for her," Eleanor's voice continued through Elizabeth. "Tonight, as friends among the staff, paid them to look away." Sarah paled. "What staff? Who would help harm a child?" The face in the pillow contorted again, the features blurring momentarily before resolving into a clearer image. Man with the medicines, orderly, gray hair, scar on hand. "Wilkins," Sarah whispered. "The night orderly who distributes medications when the pharmacy is closed. He has access to all the wards." Charlotte turned to her with alarm. "When does he make his rounds?" 9:30, the night doses." Sarah checked her watch. "In less than 10 minutes. We need to move Elizabeth," Edward said decisively. "If Collins has bribed Wilkins to harm her, she's not safe in this bed." "Where could we take her?" Charlotte asked. "If Collins knows she's at Ravenswood, he might have people watching the exits." Sarah thought quickly. "The private rooms on the 3rd floor. They're used for wealthy patients who pay for isolation. Several are empty at present. We could hide her there temporarily, at least until we can alert Dr. Hayes or the authorities." As they discussed this plan, the manifestation in the pillow began to fade, the features becoming less distinct. Elizabeth's body relaxed, her breathing returning to a more natural rhythm. When she spoke again, it was in her own childish voice, weak and confused. "Aunt Charlotte, my head hurts. Who are you talking to?" Charlotte composed herself, wiping away tears. "Just rest, Elizabeth. We're going to move you to a quieter room where you can sleep better." The girl nodded drowsily, already drifting back towards sleep. The face in the pillow had vanished completely, leaving only ordinary hospital bedding. "We need to hurry," Sarah said, her nurse's training taking over. "I'll get a wheelchair from the supply closet. Elizabeth is too weak to walk, but we can't risk using the stretcher. It would attract too much attention." While Sarah retrieved the wheelchair, Edward and Charlotte carefully prepared Elizabeth for transport, wrapping her in an extra blanket and gathering her few personal items. The girl was only semi-conscious, compliant in her feverish state. "I'll have to ensure no one from the night staff sees us," Sarah said when she returned with the wheelchair. "At this hour most patients are settled, but there's always someone patrolling the corridors." They managed to transfer Elizabeth from the bed to the wheelchair without incident. Edward noticed that Charlotte deliberately left the hospital pillow behind, instead supporting her niece's head with a folded blanket. "Ready?" Sarah asked, positioning herself behind the wheelchair. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you should go ahead to ensure the corridor is clear. Miss Pruitt and I will follow with Elizabeth." Edward nodded and moved toward the ward entrance, but froze at the sound of approaching footsteps and male voices. One belonged to Dr. Matthews, the night physician. The other was unfamiliar, deeper, authoritative, with a slight accent that might have been Southern. "Assure you, doctor, I've been searching for my stepdaughter for weeks. When I learned she had been admitted to Ravenswood under false pretenses, I was shocked and deeply concerned. I understand, Mr. Collins. A most irregular situation. Rest assured, we'll get to the bottom of it. The nurse who admitted her will face disciplinary action." Edward retreated quickly to the others. "It's Collins," he whispered urgently. "With Dr. Matthews. They're coming to the ward now." Charlotte's face drained of color. How did he find her so quickly? We need to hide, Sarah decided, glancing around the darkened ward. The isolation room. It's the only option. Moving as quietly as possible, they wheeled Elizabeth toward the small room at the end of the ward where they had first witnessed the full manifestation the previous night. Sarah closed the door behind them, leaving it open just a crack so they could observe the ward. Through the narrow opening, they watched as Dr. Matthews entered with a well-dressed gentleman who could only be James Collins. Tall, handsome in a severe way, with a neatly trimmed beard and expensive clothing, he carried himself with the confidence of wealth and social position. Bed 7, you said? Collins was asking, moving purposefully down the ward. I appreciate your accommodation, doctor, especially at this late hour. A father's concern is perfectly understandable, Matthews replied. Though I must say, your sister-in-law's actions in concealing the child's whereabouts were most irresponsible. Elizabeth has been dangerously ill. Charlotte has never recovered from my wife's death, Collins said smoothly. She has convinced herself of all manner of fantastic notions, including, I regret to say, suspicion of me. Grief affects different people in different ways, doctor. They reached bed 7, finding it empty. Dr. Matthews looked around in confusion. I don't understand. The patient was here during evening rounds. Collins's expression hardened. Where is she, doctor? Where is my stepdaughter? I'm not certain. Perhaps she's been moved for a procedure or examination. Matthews looked increasingly flustered. Let me check with the night nurse. As the doctor moved toward the ward entrance, Collins remained by the empty bed, his expression changing from confusion to cold calculation. He picked up the pillow, examining it carefully before replacing it on the bed. He knows, Charlotte whispered, watching through the crack in the door. He knows about the manifestation. In the ward, Collins had begun to methodically search the surrounding area, checking behind screens and in adjacent beds. His movements were deliberate, predatory. He's going to search the entire ward, Edward realized. We need to move now, while Dr. Matthews is gone. Sarah assessed their options quickly. The service stairs at the back of the isolation room. They lead directly to the 3rd floor. We can avoid the main corridors entirely. With no time to waste, they maneuvered Elizabeth's wheelchair toward the rear of the isolation room, where a narrow door led to the service stairwell. Edward went first, holding the door as Sarah and Charlotte guided the wheelchair through. The stairwell was dimly lit and smelled of antiseptic and damp. The steep steps would make it impossible to use the wheelchair. We'll have to carry her, Edward said, already moving to lift the semi-conscious girl from the chair. I'll take her. You lead the way, Nurse Bennett. With Elizabeth in his arms, alarmingly light, her small body burning with renewed fever, Edward followed Sarah up the narrow stairs. Charlotte came last, glancing behind them fearfully as the door swung shut. The climb was difficult in the near darkness, but they managed to reach the 3rd floor landing without incident. Sarah carefully opened the door, peering out to ensure the corridor was empty before signaling them forward. This way, she whispered, leading them down a carpeted hallway lined with private rooms. The 3rd floor was noticeably different from the wards below, more luxurious, with individual gas lamps outside each door and actual furnishings in the hallway. Room 312 should be unoccupied. It's at the end of the corridor, with a view of the garden. They had almost reached the room when a door opened further down the hallway, revealing an elderly woman in an expensive dressing gown. She stared at them in confusion. Nurse? What's happening? Who are these people? Sarah stepped forward smoothly. Nothing to concern yourself with, Mrs. Peabody. Just a patient transfer. Please return to your room. It's well past visiting hours. The woman hesitated, clearly suspicious, but years of respecting medical authority won out. She retreated into her room, though not without a final curious glance in their direction. Sarah quickly unlocked room 312 and ushered them inside. Edward gently placed Elizabeth on the large bed, a proper bed, not the narrow iron frames used in the wards, with a real mattress and fine linens. The girl stirred slightly but didn't wake, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her fever's rising again, Charlotte said worriedly, placing a hand on her niece's forehead. She needs medication. Sarah checked Elizabeth's pulse, her expression concerned. I can get quinine from the dispensary, but I'll need to be careful. If Collins has enlisted Wilkins's help, I could be seen. Is there anyone else you trust? Edward asked. Another nurse or doctor who would believe our story? Sarah considered this. Dr. Hayes, perhaps. He's stern but fair, and he takes patient welfare very seriously, but he won't be back until morning. We can't wait that long, Charlotte said, her voice tight with fear. James won't stop searching, and if he's desperate enough to come to the hospital himself, he must be truly worried about what Eleanor might reveal. Edward made a decision. Nurse Bennett, go to the dispensary for the quinine. Be as quick and discreet as possible. Miss Pruitt and I will remain with Elizabeth. If anyone tries to enter, we'll improvise. After Sarah departed, Edward secured the door as best he could and began exploring the private room for anything that might be useful. It was well appointed. A water pitcher and basin, clean towels, a small writing desk with stationery bearing the Ravenswood letterhead, even a telephone. This last item caught his attention. The telephone, he said, turning to Charlotte. We could call for help. Who would believe us? She asked bitterly. A wild tale about a dead woman manifesting through a pillow, warning that her husband murdered her and now threatens her child. Not that part, Edward conceded. But we could report an intruder in the hospital, a man impersonating a patient's relative. The police would respond to that. Before they could act on this idea, Elizabeth began to stir more vigorously, her small body twisting beneath the blankets. Her eyes opened, unfocused and bright with fever. She's coming again, she whispered. Can you see her? Edward and Charlotte turned toward the pillow beneath the girl's head, a different pillow than the one in the ward below, yet already beginning to show the same impossible manifestation. The surface rippled, a face gradually taking shape, Eleanor's face, gaunt and desperate. He's searching, Elizabeth said in that adult voice that wasn't her own. Methodically, floor by floor. He'll find us soon. Charlotte knelt beside the bed, clutching her sister's locket. Eleanor, we need more proof. Something that will convince the authorities. Your diaries are still hidden in the house. We can't reach them tonight. The face in the pillow shifted, the features becoming clearer, more defined. The locket, Elizabeth's voice said. My locket. Open it. Charlotte looked down at the silver locket in her hand. It only contains your portrait and Elizabeth's. I've opened it before. Hidden compartment. Press the inner rim. 3 times. With trembling fingers, Charlotte opened the locket, revealing the 2 miniature portraits within. A dark-haired woman on one side, a baby on the other. She examined the inner rim carefully, then pressed it 3 times as instructed. To her astonishment, the backing of the baby's portrait clicked and slid aside, revealing a tiny hidden compartment. Inside was a tightly folded piece of paper, so small it could barely be seen. Charlotte carefully extracted it with a hairpin from her chignon, unfolding it to reveal microscopic handwriting that covered both sides of the paper. Eleanor's hand, she whispered, recognizing her sister's distinctive script. What is it? My insurance, Elizabeth's voice replied, as the face in the pillow formed the same words. Dates, doses, symptoms. My final testimony. He doesn't know it exists. Charlotte scanned the tiny writing, her expression changing from confusion to horror. Arsenic poisoning, documented over months, and a final dose of... She squinted at the paper. I can't make out this word. Digitalis, from his botanical collection, extracted himself. Slows the heart until it appears to stop. When combined with arsenic already in the system, the face in the pillow contorted. Perfect mimicry of death, but temporary. I woke in the coffin hours after burial. Edward felt sick at the thought of what Eleanor Pruitt had experienced. The gradual poisoning, the cataleptic state induced by the digitalis, the horrifying awakening in a sealed coffin beneath 6 feet of earth. It was a fate worse than any clean death. This is evidence, he said, examining the tiny document. Combined with medical testimony about the effects of these poisons, it could be enough to convince the authorities to exhume your grave and examine your remains. Arsenic leaves traces in hair and nails that can be detected years later. The face in the pillow seemed to nod in agreement. Yes, but James suspects the locket contains something. That's why he wants Elizabeth, why he let her fall ill. Easier to search her possessions after death. No questions about a grieving father claiming keepsakes. A sound from the hallway interrupted them. Footsteps approaching, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Edward moved to the door, listening intently. He could make out at least 2 male voices. One belonged to Dr. Matthews, the other, unmistakably, to James Collins. Must be here somewhere, doctor. I've checked the entire 2nd floor. My sources were quite certain she was moved to a private room. Mr. Collins, I assure you, transferring a charity patient to a private room would be highly irregular. These accommodations are reserved for paying patients of means. Nevertheless, I insist we check. If my stepdaughter is as ill as you claim, she requires my presence and consent for treatment. They were moving methodically down the corridor, checking each room. Edward turned to Charlotte in alarm. "They're searching every room. We're trapped." Charlotte clutched the locket containing Eleanor's damning evidence, her face pale but determined. "The window. How far is the drop to the ground?" Edward rushed to the window, pushing aside heavy curtains. The view revealed the hospital's rear garden, dimly visible in the moonlight, 3 floors below. Too far to jump safely, especially with Elizabeth in her condition. "There must be another way out," Charlotte insisted, moving to examine the room more thoroughly. A service passage, a dumbwaiter, anything. The footsteps were closer now, only a few doors away. They could hear Dr. Matthews apologizing to disturbed patients, as Collins insisted on checking each room. Elizabeth stirred on the bed, her eyes opening again. "The gap is closing," she said in Eleanor's voice, even as the face in the pillow began to fade. "I can't hold the connection much longer. The boundary strengthens as she heals." "Eleanor, how do we escape?" Charlotte asked desperately. "James is almost here." The face in the pillow was barely visible now, like a drawing being slowly erased. "The medicine cabinet," Elizabeth's voice whispered. "Behind it. Service shaft for linens and waste. All Victorian hospitals have them." Edward immediately began examining the large cabinet built into the wall near the washstand. It appeared to be fixed in place, but when he applied pressure to one side, it swung outward slightly, revealing a narrow opening beyond. "She's right," he said with astonishment. "There's a passage here." The opening revealed a narrow vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the wall, a maintenance access for the hospital's service systems. It was dark and dusty, clearly rarely used, but wide enough for a person to climb through. "We can't get Elizabeth down that," Charlotte said in dismay. "She's too weak to climb, and it's too narrow to carry her." The footsteps had stopped outside a room 2 doors down. They could hear Collins' voice clearly now, growing impatient with Dr. Matthews' protestations. "I insist you open this door, doctor. As Elizabeth's legal guardian, I have every right to see where she's being treated." A new voice joined the conversation. Sarah Bennett apparently returned from the dispensary. "Dr. Matthews, is something wrong?" "Ah, Nurse Bennett. Perhaps you can assist us. Mr. Collins is searching for his stepdaughter, Elizabeth Collins. She appears to have been moved from bed 7 in the children's ward. Would you happen to know where she is?" There was a brief pause before Sarah responded. "Elizabeth Collins?" "Yes, doctor. She was transferred to the isolation room on the 1st floor when her fever spiked again. I was just coming to inform you." Edward and Charlotte exchanged glances of relief. Sarah was buying them time, directing the search away from their location. But it wouldn't last long. As soon as Collins and Matthews checked the isolation room and found it empty, they would resume their systematic search. "We need to split up," Edward decided. "Miss Pruitt, you take the locket and the evidence it contains. Use this service shaft to escape the hospital. Find a police officer, show them the document, and explain that James Collins is threatening his stepdaughter. What about you and Elizabeth? I'll remain with her. Create a distraction if necessary." Edward checked his pocket watch. "It's nearly 10. The night shift change occurs at 11. There will be more staff moving about then, making it harder for Collins to search systematically." Charlotte hesitated, clearly torn between escaping with the evidence and remaining with her niece. "If James finds you here with Elizabeth, I'll tell them I'm a hospital photographer documenting her case for Dr. Hayes. It's close enough to the truth to be believable." The face in the pillow had completely vanished now, and Elizabeth had fallen back into a restless sleep, the adult presence seemingly gone from her small body. The manifestation had departed, or been unable to maintain its connection. After a moment of indecision, Charlotte nodded. "Very well, but promise me you'll protect her. Eleanor entrusted her to me, and now I'm entrusting her to you." "I give you my word," Edward replied solemnly. "Now go, quickly. They'll finish searching the 1st floor soon." Charlotte bent to kiss Elizabeth's forehead, then handed the quinine Sarah had brought to Edward. "Give her this when she wakes. It will help with the fever." She clutched the locket tightly. "I'll find help. I won't fail her, or Eleanor." With surprising agility for a woman in Victorian dress, Charlotte maneuvered herself into the narrow service shaft, finding footholds on the metal rungs. Before descending, she looked back at Edward with a mixture of fear and determination. "If anything happens to me, the key evidence is in this locket. Eleanor's final testimony against her murderer. Make sure it reaches the authorities." Then she was gone, climbing downward into the darkness of the shaft, her dark clothing quickly disappearing from view. Edward replaced the cabinet as best he could to conceal the opening, then turned his attention to Elizabeth. The girl was sleeping fitfully, her fever clearly rising again despite the brief improvement. Edward dampened a cloth from the water basin and placed it on her forehead, then prepared a dose of the quinine Sarah had brought. Voices in the corridor indicated that Collins and Matthews were still searching, having moved several doors closer. Edward estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before the search reached room 312. He needed a plan, some way to explain his presence with Elizabeth if they were discovered. An idea formed. Quickly, he arranged the bedding to look as professional as possible, positioned himself as if documenting the patient, and took out his pocket notebook. If anyone entered, he would claim to be recording Elizabeth's symptoms for Dr. Hayes's report to the hospital board. The voices were just outside now. Edward could hear Dr. Matthews's weary tone and Collins's increasingly insistent responses. Then, a new voice joined them, deep, authoritative, and instantly recognizable to Edward as Nurse Holloway. "Dr. Matthews, what is the meaning of this disturbance? My patients are trying to rest." "Ah, Nurse Holloway, this is Mr. Collins, stepfather of Elizabeth Collins from the children's ward. It seems his stepdaughter has been moved without proper documentation. Nurse Bennett suggested she might be in the isolation room, but she wasn't there." "Elizabeth Collins," Nurse Holloway repeated, her tone revealing nothing. "The scarlet fever case in bed 7. Yes, I authorized her transfer myself this evening, to the annex building." This was news to Edward. There had been no authorized transfer. Nurse Holloway was fabricating it on the spot. But why would she help conceal Elizabeth's location? The annex? Collins sounded frustrated. Why would a charity patient be moved to the annex? "Isolation protocol, Mr. Collins. We had a new case of scarlet fever admitted this evening. To prevent cross-infection, I had Elizabeth moved to the recuperation ward in the annex. Standard procedure when a patient is recovering but still potentially contagious." There was a moment of silence before Dr. Matthews spoke. "That makes perfect sense, Nurse Holloway, though I wish you had informed me earlier. I left a note for you at the nurse's station, Doctor. Perhaps it was misplaced." Nurse Holloway's voice remained perfectly professional. "Mr. Collins, if you wish to see your stepdaughter, I suggest you return in the morning during proper visiting hours. The annex is closed to visitors after 9 o'clock. Collins' response was tightly controlled but edged with anger. "I see. And tell me, Nurse Holloway, was it also your decision to admit my stepdaughter under false pretenses 3 weeks ago, to allow her aunt to misrepresent herself as the child's guardian?" "I was not on duty when Elizabeth was admitted, Mr. Collins, but I assure you the hospital administration takes such matters very seriously. Dr. Hayes will want to speak with you about this situation in the morning." The conversation continued, but the voices were moving away from room 312, back toward the main staircase. Nurse Holloway had successfully diverted Collins's search away from their hiding place. But why? Did she suspect what was happening? Had she witnessed more of the manifestation than she had admitted? Edward remained tense, listening until the voices faded completely. Only then did he relax slightly, returning his attention to Elizabeth. The girl's fever seemed to have plateaued, not worsening but not improving either. He administered the quinine as Charlotte had instructed, supporting Elizabeth's head as she swallowed the bitter medicine without fully waking. Now he could only wait for Charlotte to return with help, wait for the night to pass, wait to see if Collins would discover their deception. The locket containing Eleanor's damning testimony was safely away from the hospital, but Elizabeth remained vulnerable. And Edward himself was in a precarious position, unauthorized in a private patient room with a young girl under his sole care. Time passed slowly. Edward maintained his vigil beside Elizabeth's bed, periodically refreshing the cool cloth on her forehead and listening for any sound of approaching danger. The hospital gradually quieted as the night deepened, the 11 o'clock shift change coming and going without incident. It was nearly midnight when Elizabeth stirred again, her eyes opening with surprising clarity. "Mr. Blackwood?" she said, her voice entirely her own. A child's voice, weak but lucid. "Where's Aunt Charlotte?" "She's gone to get help," Edward replied gently. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I think. My head doesn't hurt as much." She looked around the unfamiliar room in confusion. "Where are we? This isn't the children's ward. It's a private room. We moved you here to help you recover more comfortably." Edward decided a simplified explanation was best for now. "Do you remember anything about the last few days, Elizabeth? About talking to your mother?" The girl's expression clouded. "I had dreams, strange dreams. Mother was trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't understand all of it." She touched the pillow beneath her head tentatively. "She was here, in the pillow. I could feel her. Yes, Edward said simply, seeing no reason to deny what Elizabeth clearly knew. She was trying to protect you. From Father James, Elizabeth whispered, fear entering her eyes. She said he hurt her, that he wanted to hurt me too. He won't hurt you, Edward promised. Your Aunt Charlotte has gone to ensure that. You're safe now. Elizabeth seemed to accept this, her eyelids growing heavy again. Mr. Blackwood, will Mother come back? To the pillow. The question caught him off guard. I don't know, Elizabeth. Perhaps, when you're stronger. The girl nodded drowsily. I hope so. There's so much I want to tell her. Her eyes closed as sleep reclaimed her, but her breathing seemed easier now, her rest more natural than feverish. Edward checked his pocket watch again. It was well past midnight, and still no sign of Charlotte or the authorities she had gone to summon. Had she escaped the hospital safely? Had she found help? Or had Collins somehow intercepted her? A soft knock at the door startled him from these worrying thoughts. He tensed, ready to confront whoever entered, but relaxed slightly when Sarah Bennett's voice came through the door. Mr. Blackwood, it's Nurse Bennett. May I come in? Edward quickly opened the door, ushering the young nurse inside before securing it again. Sarah looked exhausted but relieved to find them safe. I've been searching for you for over an hour, she said in a hushed voice. After I directed Mr. Collins to the isolation room, Nurse Holloway sent me to check the private rooms on this floor. She didn't say why, just that I should be thorough but discreet. Nurse Holloway knows we're here. I think she suspects, Sarah replied, checking Elizabeth's temperature and pulse with professional efficiency. She's been acting strangely all evening, inserting herself into conversations with Dr. Matthews and Mr. Collins, directing searches away from this wing, assigning staff to unnecessary tasks that keep them away from this floor. She's helping us, Edward realized with astonishment. But why? She seemed so dismissive of the manifestation, so determined to maintain hospital protocol. Nurse Holloway is complicated. She places patient welfare above all else, even hospital rules when necessary. Sarah adjusted Elizabeth's blankets. The fever's breaking. That's a good sign. Where is Miss Pruitt? Edward explained Charlotte's escape through the service shaft with the evidence from Eleanor's locket. She went to find the police. That was over 2 hours ago. Sarah's expression grew concerned. The hospital grounds are extensive, and the service shaft likely emerges somewhere near the laundry facilities at the rear. If she's unfamiliar with the layout, she might have become lost or disoriented, or intercepted, Edward added grimly. If Collins has accomplices watching the hospital. A new noise interrupted them. Footsteps in the corridor again, but different from before. These were quick, purposeful, multiple sets moving in unison. Before Edward or Sarah could react, the door opened forcefully, revealing Dr. Hayes accompanied by 2 police officers and behind them, Nurse Holloway. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Hayes said, his expression severe. I believe you have some explaining to do. Edward rose to his feet, preparing to defend his presence, but one of the officers stepped forward first. Edward Blackwood, I'm Detective Sullivan, Boston Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding Charlotte Pruitt. Charlotte? Has something happened to her? The detective's expression was grave. Miss Pruitt was found 30 minutes ago on the hospital grounds, unconscious and severely injured. She's been taken to the surgical ward. Before losing consciousness, she asked specifically for you and mentioned something about evidence in a locket. Edward felt his blood run cold. James Collins. It has to be. Did she have a silver locket with her? The detective nodded. It was clutched in her hand. The doctors are keeping it safe with her other possessions. That locket contains evidence of murder, Detective. Eleanor Pruitt, Charlotte's sister and Elizabeth's mother, was poisoned by James Collins 3 years ago. The locket contains her written testimony, describing how he administered arsenic over months, then digitalis to induce a death-like state. She was buried alive. The room fell silent as the officers and medical staff processed this extraordinary claim. Dr. Hayes was the first to speak. Mr. Blackwood, these are extremely serious allegations. What evidence do you have beyond this supposed document? The photographs, Edward said, retrieving his camera bag. I've captured images of Eleanor Pruitt's face manifesting in her daughter's pillow. It sounds impossible, I know, but it's not impossible, Nurse Holloway interrupted, her stern facade finally cracking. I've seen it too, multiple times over the past week, as has Nurse Bennett and Nurse Aldridge. The manifestation appears most strongly when Elizabeth's fever peaks. Dr. Hayes turned to her in astonishment. Catherine, you can't possibly believe. I believe in what I see with my own eyes, William, she replied firmly. And I've been a nurse long enough to know there are things in sick rooms that science has yet to explain. This manifestation is real, whatever its cause. Detective Sullivan, a solidly built man with a practical air, seemed reluctant to engage with talk of supernatural phenomena, leaving aside the unusual aspects of this situation. You're suggesting that James Collins murdered his wife for financial gain, and now poses a threat to her daughter for the same reason. Precisely, Edward confirmed. And he's here in the hospital tonight, searching for Elizabeth. He's already bribed at least one staff member, an orderly named Wilkins, to assist him. The second officer spoke for the first time. We encountered Mr. Collins in the annex building about 15 minutes ago. He claimed to be searching for his stepdaughter who had been transferred there. When we questioned him about Miss Pruitt's injuries, he became agitated and fled the premises. Officers are searching for him now. Elizabeth needs protection, Sarah said, stepping forward. At least until we can verify the evidence in the locket. Detective Sullivan nodded. One of us will remain here with the child. Officer Parker, please escort Dr. Hayes to the surgical ward. We need to secure that locket and get a statement from Miss Pruitt if she regains consciousness. As the second officer and Dr. Hayes departed, Sullivan turned back to Edward. I'd like to see these photographs you mentioned, Mr. Blackwood. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Edward opened his camera bag and retrieved the prints he had made of the manifestation. The detective examined them carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to troubled uncertainty. I've been a police officer for 20 years, he said finally. Seen a lot of strange things. Never anything like this. He handed the photographs back to Edward. But I don't need to understand how a dead woman's face appears in a pillow to investigate a potential murder. If there's evidence in that locket, we'll act on it. While they spoke, Nurse Holloway had moved to Elizabeth's bedside, checking her condition with practiced hands. Her fever has broken completely, she announced. The crisis has passed. With proper care, she should make a full recovery. And the manifestation? Edward asked. Eleanor said the boundary was strengthening as Elizabeth healed, that she might not be able to maintain the connection. Perhaps that's for the best, Nurse Holloway said quietly. The dead should rest, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever unfinished business Eleanor Pruitt had, it seems she's accomplished it by warning us about her daughter's danger. The night passed slowly. Detective Sullivan maintained his post in Elizabeth's room, while Edward and Sarah took turns sitting with the recovering girl. Nurse Holloway returned to her duties elsewhere in the hospital but checked on them periodically. There was no sign of James Collins, though reports from other officers indicated he had fled Boston, withdrawing a substantial sum from his bank before disappearing. Around dawn, Officer Parker returned with news from the surgical ward. Miss Pruitt regained consciousness briefly, he reported. She suffered a severe concussion and some internal injuries, but the doctors believe she'll survive. She confirmed that Collins attacked her as she tried to leave the hospital grounds. He demanded the locket, and when she refused, he struck her repeatedly and left her for dead in the garden. And the locket itself? Edward asked anxiously. Is the evidence intact? Parker nodded. Detective Mills is examining it now. The document appears genuine. Detailed records of symptoms and dated entries about Collins administering unknown substances to Mrs. Pruitt's food and drink. The handwriting will need to be verified, of course, but it's compelling evidence. Enough for an exhumation order? Edward pressed. The captain thinks so. He's already speaking with the judge. If Eleanor Pruitt's body shows evidence of arsenic poisoning, as the document suggests, Collins will face murder charges when he's apprehended. As sunrise painted the hospital room in pale golden light, Elizabeth woke fully for the first time in days. Her eyes were clear, her color improved, though she remained weak from her long illness. Mr. Blackwood, she said, recognizing him at her bedside. Is it over? Is Mother gone? Edward took her small hand gently. Yes, Elizabeth, I believe her work is finished. She protected you as best she could. I could hear her sometimes, the girl said softly, even before I came to the hospital, whispering to me when I was alone, warning me about Father James. I thought I was imagining it. You weren't imagining anything, Edward assured her. Your mother found a way to reach you when you needed her most. That's a rare and precious gift. Elizabeth's gaze moved to the pillow beneath her head, an ordinary pillow now, showing no sign of the extraordinary manifestation that had occupied it for days. Will they find her? Will they bring her up from the dark? Yes, Edward promised. The police are arranging it now. Your mother will receive the proper care and respect she deserves. The girl nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Aunt Charlotte, is she here? Edward exchanged glances with Sarah, unsure how much to tell the recovering child about her aunt's condition. "Your aunt was injured," Sarah said gently, "but the doctors are caring for her, and she's expected to recover fully. She's very brave, your aunt. She never stopped fighting for you or your mother." In the days that followed, events moved swiftly. An exhumation order was granted, and Eleanor Pruitt's coffin was carefully raised from its 3-year resting place in Mount Auburn Cemetery. The scene that greeted the medical examiner confirmed the terrible truth Charlotte had suspected all along. The coffin's interior bore unmistakable signs of Eleanor's desperate struggle after waking. Torn fabric, splintered wood where she had tried to claw her way out, fingernails embedded in the coffin lid. Medical tests confirmed significant levels of arsenic in her hair and nail samples, as well as traces of digitalis in tissue that had been preserved by the coffin's sealing. James Collins was apprehended trying to board a ship to Europe. When confronted with the evidence from the locket and the exhumation, he broke down and confessed to poisoning his wife, though he claimed he hadn't known she would wake in the coffin, a detail that did nothing to mitigate the horror of his crime in the eyes of the law or the public. Charlotte Pruitt recovered from her injuries and was granted full guardianship of Elizabeth. As the girl's health improved, they made plans to leave Boston, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories of Ravenswood Hospital and James Collins' betrayal. Before their departure, Charlotte sought out Edward at his photography studio on Washington Street. She carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, offering him the package. "Elizabeth and I wanted you to have this, a token of our gratitude for all you've done." Inside was the silver locket, cleaned and polished, its hidden compartment now empty of its damning evidence, which remained with the authorities as part of their case against Collins. "I can't accept this," Edward protested. "It's a family heirloom. It should stay with Elizabeth." Charlotte shook her head. "Eleanor would want you to have it. Without your photographs, without your willingness to believe the impossible, her truth might never have come to light. She might never have found justice." Reluctantly, Edward accepted the gift. "What will you do now? Where will you go?" "West," Charlotte replied. "California, perhaps. Somewhere sunny and open, with no shadows or dark corners. Somewhere Elizabeth can heal and grow without the weight of the past pressing down on her." "And the manifestation? Has there been any sign of it since that night in the hospital?" "No. Whatever doorway opened between our world and wherever Eleanor's consciousness existed, it seems to have closed now. Her purpose was fulfilled. Her daughter is safe, her murderer facing justice." Charlotte's expression softened, but Elizabeth still speaks to her sometimes, in her prayers at night. She believes her mother can hear her, wherever she is now. Edward didn't discourage this belief. After what he had witnessed at Ravenswood Hospital, who was he to define the boundaries between the possible and impossible, between science and something beyond its current understanding? 1 week later, Edward received a commission from a medical journal to photograph a new surgical procedure at Massachusetts General Hospital. His reputation for capturing clear, detailed medical images remained intact. His brief venture into supernatural photography, known only to a handful of people who had witnessed it firsthand. As he packed his equipment for the assignment, he caught sight of Eleanor's locket on his desk. On impulse, he opened it, studying the 2 portraits inside. Eleanor's serene face on one side, baby Elizabeth's on the other. The hidden compartment remained empty, its secret purpose now fulfilled, or nearly empty. As Edward tilted the locket to close it, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a tiny engraving on the inside rim, barely visible in the afternoon light. 3 simple words: "Love transcends boundaries." He thought of the face in the pillow, of a mother's determination to protect her child even from beyond the grave. Some would call it a ghost story, others a manifestation of collective hysteria or a trick of light and shadow captured by his camera. Edward Blackwood, photographer and witness to the impossible, preferred to think of it as proof that the human spirit was more resilient and more mysterious than science yet understood. That love indeed could transcend the ultimate boundary between life and death. When he raised his camera to his eye later that day, focusing on the clinical scene before him, he did so with a renewed appreciation for the limits of what his lens could capture, and for the vast, mysterious world that existed beyond its frame. Years later, in 1937, an elderly Edward Blackwood gave a final interview to a young journalist interested in photography's early days. The conversation turned to his most memorable assignments. "There was one," the old man said, fingering a silver locket that hung around his neck. "A hospital ward in 1897. I was hired to photograph nurses and their patients. But what I captured instead?" He smiled faintly. Well, let's just say it convinced me that photographs don't lie, even when they show us things we cannot explain. The journalist pressed for details, but Edward merely shook his head. Some stories are best left in shadow, he said. But I'll tell you this. Look closely at old photographs. Study them carefully. You might be surprised by what reveals itself when you truly examine the details. The interview was published in a small photography journal a month after Edward Blackwood's death. The silver locket was buried with him, its secret compartment containing not a document this time, but a small print of the photograph from Ravenswood Hospital. An image of nurses standing among iron beds, and in one of them, a young girl whose pillow contained a face that shouldn't have been there. The mystery of the 1897 hospital photograph has persisted in certain circles of collectors and historians. Some claim to have located the original glass plate negative in Edward Blackwood's effects, though it has never been publicly exhibited. Others dismiss the story as Victorian-era spiritualist nonsense, a hoax perpetrated by a photographer looking to capitalize on the period's fascination with the supernatural. But in a small cemetery in Western California, visitors sometimes report an unusual phenomenon near the graves of Elizabeth Collins Pruitt and her Aunt Charlotte. On certain evenings, particularly when the light is fading, the white marble pillows carved atop their headstones appear to shift and change, faces briefly forming in the stone before disappearing back into solid marble. Just a trick of light and shadow, most would say. But perhaps, as Edward Blackwood discovered that November in 1897, there are some boundaries that love can transcend, some connections that even death cannot sever completely. Perhaps all it takes is a careful eye and the willingness to truly examine what lies beneath the surface of the ordinary world. Look closely. You might be surprised by what you see.